Hello Year 12 and welcome to our minority influence video lesson. So today we're going to have a look at what is minority influence and how can the minority have an influence over the majority. This includes consistency, commitment and flexibility. So what is minority influence? Minority influence is a form of social influence where the minority of people, so it could either be one person or a group of people, persuade others to adopt their beliefs, attitudes or behaviours. This leads to internalization or conversion. So they have these attitudes and behaviours are changed not only publicly but also privately. So they internalize these views. Minority influence. So this is opposing conformity. Conformity, we have the majority influencing the minority. With minority, we have the minority influencing the majority. Within majority and minority influence, the influence can be over one person, a small group, or a large group of people. And minority influence is more likely to lead to this internalization because we have to have this thing called deeper processing. So, looking at the first of the three key terms we're having a look at today. So, consistency. This is where those with the minority view, they need to make sure they are consistent with their message. So if they are consistent, they can increase the interest from the majority. So you're more interested if the message they are saying is either all the same thing, so this is synchronic consistency, as well as diachronic consistency. So they've been saying the same consistent message over a long period of time. And this consistency is what makes the majority begin to think about their own views. A couple of examples here. Maybe they've got a point if they all think this way, or maybe they've got a point if they keep saying it. So if they are all thinking in one type of way, and you can see it's very consistent, the message they are giving is very consistent between them all, we may start to think about our own views. And if they keep saying it, you walk past somebody who is always saying the same thing, you've got more of a chance of them thinking about their own views and how their views align with this minority view. Okay, so we've had consistency and now we have a commitment. So the minority can show that they're committed. This could either be through something very extreme, such as chaining themselves to a gate or getting arrested to show they are committed to their cause. Or it could be something that is not as high risk, such as an MP who's always canvassing the streets and they are handing out a lot of flyers, and someone that you always see protesting, something that isn't necessarily getting them arrested, but you can still see their commitment to their own cause. And the reason that this commitment is important, because if you can see a commitment, then the majority are more likely to pay attention to the minority. And this is called the augmentation principle, and we're going to talk about that in a couple of lessons' time. And finally, we've had consistency, commitment, and now we have flexibility. So Nemeth in 1986 argued that consistency isn't the only important factor because consistency can be interpreted negatively. So if you're extremely consistent, repeating the same arguments, you're very continuous with your message, it could actually be seen that you are unflexible. You're not willing to change your point of view, you're not willing to listen to other people's arguments, and this can be very off-putting. So these people of the minority, they need to be prepared to adapt. They need to be able to listen to other people and be flexible. So a really good example of this is environmentalists. So they were firstly known as tree huggers, and they wanted to create a change, and they campaigned and they were committed and they handed out flyers. The difference here is that they listened to the majority. So when the majority said, I don't want to go to 5 different bins and separate all of my glass and stuff and waste petrol going to different parts of the town, the minority, which were the environmentalists, listened and said, well, what if we bring the bins to you and we collect from you? So they gave them an option. They listened to them and they compromised. And because of this compromise, the public were more willing to go that step further. So they were willing to say, oh, well, if they're going to bring me a bin, then, I may as well use it. It's not going to harm. And eventually, this has obviously come to what we know now, which is recycling. But at some point, recycling was a minority view. Another good example is a festival. So if you really want to go to Reading for the weekend, you may show that you are committed by having the same message and showing that you're willing to do all of your homework, earn the money to pay for it. But if you know that your parents are not going to want you to stay over for the whole weekend, then you may have some flexibility. You may say, well, okay, I understand you don't want me to go for the whole weekend. So instead of me doing that, how about I come home on the evenings and then go back in the daytime? So you're showing that flexibility and that willingness to change, because that's really important, because you've listened to what they're saying. So a balance between consistency and flexibility is needed. So yes, the message needs to be consistent, but we also need to have a little bit of flexibility in there so it's not off-putting to the majority. So how do these three things work together? I've really just spoken about it. So if you have these three factors, it can make people think about a topic. Now, this is where this deeper processing comes into play. If you hear something new that you may not agree with, it is a lot more difficult for you to actually listen to something you don't agree with, because not only have you got to listen to what they're saying, you've also got to think about, how does it line with your views? Do you agree? Do you not agree? Why? So your brain is working on a really high cognitive level. So the deeper processing is really important when we are trying to get these individuals from the majority to have a conversion to the minority viewpoint. So what happens with this is we have the deeper processing, the majority go to the minority and they have a conversation about, oh, but what have you thought about this and have you thought about that? And we have that back and forth. The minority show that flexibility, and when they've been able to do that, deeper processing has occurred, and that is why conversion is more likely to happen. So the more that conversion occurs, so the more that it happens, the faster the rate of conversion, which is the snowball effect. Once you've got a handful of people starting to convert to this, then you are more likely to get more and more people, and eventually we have this snowball effect, and actually the minority then becomes the majority, and we know that change has occurred. So we have some supporting research here by Moscovici et al. Serge Moscovici studied minority influence in a study that was called the blue slide, green slide study. All the participants were tested for colour blindness before the study, and the way this ran was they had a group of 6 people. They had 3 trials, and in the trials they had a control group, and then in the other 2 they had 2 Confederates and 4 participants. So trial 1 we had 4 participants, 2 Confederates, and they agreed on the same message. So they were very consistent with their message, and we saw that there was a high agreement rate from the majority, 8.4%. Whereas with the second trial, we had the participants, the Confederates, they were disagreeing, they were inconsistent with their message. And that actually dropped from the 8.4% of agreement to the 1.25% of agreement. And then the third control group was just a control group where we had no Confederates, so that we had something to measure this against. So all this data is in a lovely table here for you. So as you can see, trial 1, we had 4 genuine participants and 2 Confederates. The Confederates were agreeing, they were consistent with their message, they said that yes, all of the slides were green, and we had 8.4% of the majority agreeing with the minority. In the second trial, we still had 4 genuine participants, 2 Confederates, and the Confederates' message was inconsistent. So they were inconsistent on 12 of the slides, and this meant that their agreement rate from the majority was down to 1.25%. And then we had our third trial, which was our control group, where we had 6 genuine participants, no Confederates, and only 0.25% got the said the wrong colour slide. So all the slides were actually a shade of blue, our Confederates were trying to see if they could have a minority influence over the majority. So, what can we conclude from this? We can conclude from this that Moscovici's research demonstrated that a consistent minority is more successful than an inconsistent minority in changing the majority views. This is something we've just looked at, so we need that commitment, consistency, and flexibility. The flexibility here is what we're showing is quite important. So, putting this into practice, what I would like you to do now is make sure you have taken notes from this PowerPoint and my discussion with you. I would like you to answer these 2 questions for me, and I'm also going to upload the PEC grid for the AO3. What I would like you to do with that is I'd like you to highlight it, and I would like you to annotate around, and we will discuss this in an upcoming lesson. So I want to make sure that when you upload, you have uploaded your notes, your answer to these 2 questions, and your AO3 PEC grid that you have annotated. You could do this on Word, Google Docs, or you could just do this on paper. It's up to you, but I want you to make sure you have uploaded all 3 things. So the 2 questions here: name 3 behaviours that enable a minority to influence a majority. And then the second part of this question: Marcus wants to persuade his group of friends to go travelling in the summer, but the rest of the group would like to go on a beach holiday. Briefly suggest how Marcus might use the 3 behaviours you have identified in your answer to the first question to persuade his friends to go travelling. Thank you very much.